myself and disturbed by some of the actions myself. And certainly a lot of it is stuff to wonder about. But let me just start real quickly. I'll do a real quick sketch. I was first arrested opposing the war in Vietnam in 1965 in a direct nonviolent action. You know, a lot of people today like to think that they're nonviolent, but you have to remember that nonviolence is direct action that's nonviolent. It's not sitting around at home on the couch and saying, see, I'm nonviolent. I mean, that's not, so Gandhi and King and others were not sitting at home. They were pushing the system. And in many ways, it would be worth your time right now, because we're coming up on King's birthday, to look back at the radical Martin Luther King, because Martin Luther King actually was a pilgrim on a voyage, often disappointed, often defeated. But the idea, the narrative we tell ourselves is that there was this guy, he came along, he had a dream, he gave a speech, he won a Nobel, and then he went to sleep. Well, it's not actually true. And if you want to see the proof of its non-truth, go online and look up his April 4th, 1967 speech at Riverside Church, 1 year to the day before he died. Martin Luther King talked about the need to build a revolutionary movement so that we could be on the right side of the world revolution. And he talked about a revolution in consciousness so that we could have a revolution in fact. And it's hard to remember those things in the kind of wash of the media and so on. But in 1965, I was arrested opposing the war. And I was arrested several times over the next several years. In 1965, something like 65 or 70% or maybe more, 80% of Americans supported the war in Vietnam. 3 years later, 1968, something like 60% of Americans opposed the war in Vietnam. So what happened in 3 short years? Incidentally, even though you're young, you know, 3 years is about how long it takes for Americans to turn against a war, isn't it? So it's not surprising in retrospect. But 1968, a lot of things had happened in those 3 years. One thing that happened, which was very significant to me, although I don't think it was the most significant thing in the country, is that people like me, who thought of ourselves as full-time anti-war activists, did a lot of things. I was on a lot of demonstrations, I got arrested many times, to try to bring awareness of this catastrophe to our fellow citizens. Among the things I did that were most difficult for me, and you might identify with this, the most difficult things I did were two. One was I stood up at an American Federation of Teachers convention in front of several thousand people, and I denounced Hubert Humphrey, the Vice President of the United States, and I could hear my mother sitting on my shoulder saying, "Stop that, what are you doing? They're not impolite people." And I'm like, "Shit, Mom." But it's that kind of upbringing that tells you, don't speak up, don't speak out, don't embarrass the family. I'm not embarrassing your family. In any case, that was tough. The other thing that was tough in those years was I spent 2 summers in working class neighborhoods in Detroit, knocking on doors and urging people to oppose the war. And the reason that was important to me is it was a great education. When I talk about pedagogy, I'm often talking about the fact that you speak with the possibility of being heard, but you listen with the possibility of being changed. And that's what happens when you're a community organizer. You get out there and you try to say something and somebody speaks back to you and you change, your perspective changes. So that was very difficult. The other thing that happened in those 3 years, not about the anti-war movement, is that the black movement for civil rights, the black freedom movement, came out in important segments against that war. SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the leaders of the sit-ins and the freedom rides, made a statement in 1966 that said, "No black man should go 10,000 miles away to fight for a so-called freedom he doesn't enjoy in Mississippi." That shook the country up. Martin Luther King called the war, starting in 1966, immoral, illegal. He said in that 1967 speech that the greatest purveyor of violence on earth, sadly, is my own government. And he said we have to end this immoral war. He also said in that speech, people tell me, "Martin, your issue isn't war, your issue is black people." And his response was, "My issue is humanity. My issue is humanity and justice." And that was the great point. So, 1968. Oh, and then the third thing that happened in those 3 years. Vets came home and told the truth. That's happening now. Vets came home and told the truth. John Kerry, who didn't stand up for it when he was challenged in 2004, testified in front of the U.S. Senate and he said, War crimes were being committed by U.S. troops as a matter of policy, not choice. Wow, that shook the country up. When vets threw their medals at the White House and at the Congress, that shook the country to its core. And at that point, the war was inevitably going to end badly for the Americans. Lyndon Johnson went on television on March 30, this March have 31 days? Last day of March, 31st or the 30th? Whatever. But anyway, Lyndon Johnson went on TV and said, I won't run for president because I'm going to work to end the war. And those of us who worked so hard to end the war felt vindicated. And we rallied, and I was in Ann Arbor at the time, and we had a great spontaneous march around the campus and landed on the steps of the president of the University of Michigan's house. And he was the president of Michigan, I was president of SDS, so we each had a bullhorn. And I was typically inarticulate and stupid, and he was interesting. But in any case, we were full of ourselves. We were certain that we had just done something marvelous. And what he did, Robin Fleming, a wonderful guy, I was friendly with him then and we've remained friends. Robin Fleming said that night, congratulations to the scruffy anti-war people trampling his rose bushes. Congratulations, you've won a great victory. Now the war will end. I'm confident that he believed it that night. I know I believed it that night. And we went home happy. 5 days later, Martin Luther King was dead. 2 months later, Kennedy was dead. And a few months after that, it was clear that the war in Vietnam would not end, but would go on indefinitely. Now today, you can look back on it and say, well, it was horrible, but it lasted only 10 years and only 3 million people were needlessly killed. But in 1968, who knew that? What we did know for a fact is that every month that the war went on, 2,000 people would be killed. How should we stop it? Not knowing what happened, but not knowing what was going to happen. How should we stop it? And what we did is, and this was a crisis for the anti-war movement, a real crisis. And we splintered. Our organization splintered, our unity splintered, and people did many things. Some people, my brother ran away to Canada, Europe, Africa to get away from the madness. Some people went to Colorado and California and Vermont and started communes. Some people went into the factories of the Northeast to build a worker resistance to war. Some people went into the Democratic Party to build a peace wing within the party, and resulted in McGovern's nomination and crushing defeat. And we did what we did. We organized an illegal formation to try to resist what we thought was an impending repression, American fascism. And we decided we wanted to make it painful for the war makers to go on. I've never defended what we did outright. I've written a memoir about it, trying to explain how a kid like this got into a situation like that. I don't advocate it. And I was underground for 11 years. I came back, I got a doctorate, and I've been a nonviolent, direct action warrior ever since. And I urge that on all of you. Thanks.